Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Maritime Nation podcast, live edition, here from Sea Airspace 2024. I'm Jeff Gage, Data Miner Vice President for Public Sector Defense. As a Navy veteran and former military strategist, I am honored to be here today as part of the Data Miner team sponsoring this fantastic event. Data Miner delivers state-of-the-art artificial intelligence-powered alerting technology that provides digital patterns of emerging events and official information leveraging billions of daily signals from over 1 million publicly available information data sets in over 150 languages from a diverse array of sources including global and regional social media platforms, blogs, web fora, deep and dark web, audio transmissions, and increasingly public Internet of Things sensors, all in compliance with Department of Defense guidance for publicly available information. Data Miner has been a pioneer in alerting and artificial intelligence for over 13 years. And today we have two incredible speakers in Admiral Jamie Fogo and renowned futurist and author Dr. Peter Singer. They'll engage in a lively conversation about excerpts from several of Peter's best-selling novels, including Like War, which will dive into the importance of social media and open source information, for which we are, of course, proud to be at the forefront of what we do at Data Miner. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to Admiral Fogo and Peter to kick off today's Maritime Nation podcast. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a delight to be here today with my friend and brilliant author, Dr. Peter Singer. We're taping live today in the Maritime Nation podcast, so we're going to do this just like we would do on air. Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Fogo from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast, designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. Welcome to the third season of Maritime Nation. This season is produced with support from Data Miner. Data Miner is recognized as one of the world's leading AI businesses. The company's clients are the first to know about high-impact events and emerging risks so they can mitigate and manage crisis more effectively. Data Miner solutions are relied on 24/7 by hundreds of clients in over 100 countries across 6 continents to help them solve real-world problems. While in uniform, I relied on Data Miner First Alert for situational awareness within the ever-expanding publicly available information space. I'm delighted today to welcome Dr. Peter Singer. Peter Warren Singer is the strategist at New America, a professor of practice at Arizona State University, founder and managing partner of Useful Fiction, LLC, a company specializing in strategic narrative. Peter is a New York Times bestselling author described in the Wall Street Journal as the premier futurist in the national security environment, and an all-round smart guy in the Washington Post. Peter was named by the Smithsonian as one of the nation's 100 leading innovators, by Defense News as one of the 100 most influential people in defense issues, by Foreign Policy to their top 100 global thinkers list, and as an official mad scientist for the U.S. Army's Training and Indoctrination Command. No author, living or dead, has more books on the professional U.S. military reading lists of our service chiefs. Furthermore, I've known Peter since he was at the Brookings Institute before he branched out and launched Ghost Fleet with his co-author August Cole in 2015. While I was on active duty, he served as a reviewer for the Navy's maritime strategy called the Cooperative Strategy for the 21st Century. And when he spoke, the Navy listened. Peter's a frequent contributor to the Center for Maritime Strategy and a lecturer in our annual Congressional Maritime Intensive Trainer that we run every year during August recess on Capitol Hill. It's back again by popular demand this year, and Peter, I hope you can join us again. The 30 congressional staffers that have attended for 2 years, different group each time, really learned a lot and gave us rave reviews on your presentation, so thank you. Now, Peter, you started an LLC called Useful Fiction, and I've discussed this with you in the past. It allows you to combine the real with the possible and really get creative and express ideas and scenarios for technologies that are hot off the shelf or coming soon. Quantum, AI, for example. AI is here. In doing so, you've established yourself as a futurist, and you have an excellent track record of predicting things yet to come. Your research is exquisite, and in all your books, you have a plethora of real-world studies and analyses that are footnoted in the back. So I constantly am going back and forth and say, is that realistic? And sure enough, there's something that convinces me that it is. So what can you tell us about useful fiction, why you brought it into this world, and how does it apply to some of the real-world issues that we're facing in the Navy and Marine Corps with all these threats surrounding us today?
So before I answer that question, I wanted to thank you both for that kind introduction, but also for how the Navy League actually started me on my own journey. What
Wow.
you didn't have in the bio is, so my grandfather was a retired Navy captain, served World War II Pacific Theater, and as a little kid, I would spend time in his study that was full of history books, mostly World War II history books, and I would read those books, and then also Sea Power magazine that would come.
All right.
And this was back during the Cold War, so it was everything from,
Our editor's going to love it.
yeah, it was, the 600 ship fleet and the worries about Soviet carrier killers. How much has changed, how much has not changed, but that's actually what started me on this journey in the cross between issues of concern on national security, but also as a reader, as a writer. So, thank you for everything that the League's done, and also for me being able to join you today. So Useful Fiction is a project that actually came out of our experience with the Ghost Fleet book. So Ghost Fleet, for people that are not familiar with it, it's a smash up of novel and nonfiction. It's a story of what a war between the US and China and Russia might look like. So it hasn't happened, so it's fiction, but it comes with 27 pages of research and notes, and each and every technology, each scene, even some of the quotes that the characters say are all pulled from the real world. In fact, the scenes are often designed around sharing that real world idea. And so that concept of useful fiction is basically the blending together of nonfiction with the oldest communication technology of all, narrative, story. A different way of thinking about it is what we do is we create smoothies. So if,
Awesome.
Techno thrillers, whether it's the Tom Clancy's, to make another back in the day Naval Institute reference, or the new versions that Stavridis is doing with 2034. I love them. I love techno thrillers, but they're milkshakes. They're designed for entertainment. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got Navy doctrine, white papers, tech papers. It's kale. It's good for you, but it's hard to get people to consume it. And so what we're after is we start with that good stuff and then blend and create a scenario or a story around it. And so coming out of Ghost Fleet, we realized you could have a huge amount of impact with it. Ghost Fleet obviously sold well, but also it led to everything from 6 different testimonies to Congress,
Wow.
briefings to the president about what he needed to know about AI. It moved the policy dial. There were 3 US government investigations launched to keep things that happened in Ghost Fleet from ever coming true. So if you think about intelligence and futurists, sometimes you don't want to predict the future. Sometimes you want to prevent the future, right? And so coming out of that, we realized you could have a huge amount of impact with it, but also a number of other organizations had huge problems in figuring out how to tell their own story. And so since then, we've worked with over 60 different organizations, everything from Fortune 500 to Naval Expeditionary Combat Command
Yeah.
on how do you take your strategy or how do you take your doctrine, how do you take some kind of important white paper and transform it into scenarios that aren't just compelling, but are going to help people understand the key items that you want to communicate.
Well, that is absolutely fantastic. You mentioned the 600-ship Navy. We all long for that now that we've driven ourselves to below 300 ships. And Secretary John Lehman is a friend of ours at the center, and we talk about that a lot with him. And I did not know that you were called in to brief POTUS on AI. That is absolutely amazing. So I'm heartened by the fact that the White House is reading your books and paying attention. I want to go back to this book, Wired for War. And many of you have probably read it. I have two of them on my shelf, one at work and one at home. And I have told Peter I consider it the Bible for unmanned warfare. It was published in 2009, and it became a staple for War College students across the spectrum and all the services and our graduate education programs. So I just want to know, Peter, at what stage were you in your life when you wrote this? Because at the time, we were just kind of coming of age with unmanned aerial vehicles and systems. And what compelled you to do this?
I could actually remember the specific moment. It was attending a conference in Washington, D.C. This was in the early 2000s that was on the future of war. It was a 3-day event. The speakers ranged from multiple star flag officers to undersecretaries, and across that event on the future of war, the word unmanned, the word drone, the word robot was not said once. In turn, I had friends that were, for example, one was commanding a unit based in the United States, but it was flying over Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow.
Or we had, the deployment of the EOD bots to deal with roadside bombs. And I just remember thinking, this is an incredible disconnect. This moment in, it's an important moment in the history of war, but human history, we're starting to use robots in war for real, and yet the people in kind of Washington in positions of power weren't talking about it. They were so focused on the here and now, or the future that they wanted as opposed to the future they were creating. And so that's actually what started me on the journey of researching and writing what ultimately became Wired for War, which is basically me going around meeting with everything from, I wanted to go through sort of the life cycle of it. So it was everything from, let's meet with the operators of the systems out either in the field or at a base in Las Vegas that are flying a drone somewhere else. Let's meet with the people that they're fighting. So what did insurgents think about us using drones? Let's meet with the commanders of those units. How is it different to command a unit that's operating robotic systems? Let's meet with the scientists and the folks in business that are building this future. And then from that, where did you get your ideas from? It turned out to be often from science fiction writers. So let's hear from them. What do they think about all of this? And then, reflecting what we were talking about earlier, let's also pull from history and learn from that. And so that's the story of Wired for War, what it was about. What I find fascinating in reflection is you and I are talking right now, and below us is this huge convention center, football field upon football fields of booths, and there are literally hundreds of unmanned systems on display. That is a sea change. That is not what you would have, if we were here at Sea Aerospace, 10 years back. We wouldn't have seen literally hundreds of them, but they're all over the place. And it points to, again, this is the change that's happened, but also points to the change still to come.
Wow, great answer. And I got to tell you, I know you walked the what I call the watch floor this morning, and you're absolutely right. many, many companies with systems that I hope survive the valley of death as they try to market them. And the Secretary of the Navy talked about that at lunch today when he said last year at this very forum, and I was a moderator for that session, he introduced the concept of taking Task Force 59 and moving it to the 4th Fleet. And he's done so, and Jim Aiken, Commodore Jim Aiken, Admiral Jim Aiken, used to be Commodore Jim Aiken in Naples with me many years ago, has done a heck of a job actually putting systems at sea and testing them against drug runners down in the Southcom AOR.
I think that's a great point, and it also, it's not just about the capabilities of the technology, but the model that 59 has presented in terms of, one, partnership. It's not just one company. They've worked with tens of different companies. They've partnership with allies, multiple different allies, but also bluntly not waiting, but rather let's push this technology out there. Let's build experience. Let's apply it to real world problems, some of which we expect, some of which we didn't expect would happen. Like if you'll recall when the Iranians tried to kidnap one of our drones.
Right.
But the point is that we have all this learning experience. I'm a huge fan of 59 and the model. My critique would be two things. One, it's amazing that despite all that success, 59 still had to go around with a little tin cup. And try and get budget for it, despite everyone's saying it's a great. And then the second is we need to, and this is a term that we'll come up with later on, we need to replicate 59 in not just onesies and twosies. So it's great that we're adding another one for Southcom. It's great that we're doing a version of it in PACOM. We need multiple and not just on one type of technology. So, we need 59s replicating all across the place so that you're building that kind of experience. You're giving an opportunity for small companies to show off their wares. You're developing lessons learned. Big fan of it, but again, I think it's maybe I just sound like I want more of it.
No, I understand completely, and I hope our PEOs and our strategists in the Pentagon are taking note. You wrote the book in 2009. You referred, you talked about robots. We've talked about robots. The Secretary of the Navy talked about robots today. He's proud of the fact that we've named an RW rating in the Navy, a robot rating in the Navy, robotics rating, so that young petty officers can be trained how to operate these machines. There was one of them out in the hall walking up and down. It looks like a dog. I call it Rex Machina, and I think it's great. You coined the phrase in 2009, warbots. So you were prescient and visionary at the time. Took the Navy until present day to come up with the fact that, hey, we need a robotics rating in the Navy. We're moving slowly. Any comments on that? Does bureaucracy kind of stifle things?
Well, I mean, that's the role of bureaucracy, and that it's natural that it does it. I think there's a couple areas that we have to be mindful of as we hope to drive change. One is thinking about your human talent management. So I'm going to answer a technology question with a human side. If you are recruiting, training, assessing, promoting people in the exact same way, why would you expect a different outcome?
Yeah, exactly.
And so if we're thinking not just about robotics, but AI, and this is the same thing we could be talking about a civilian university, it affects both the kind of skills and talent that you want to produce. Secondly, it affects your own operations, how you do things. So that's one aspect of it. And another author's been very eloquent on this, Trent Hone, on looking at how the seeds of the U.S. Navy's success in World War II came out of personnel system and education changes in the 1910s and 20s. The second is if you're thinking about org charts. If your wire diagram is the exact same, and it might be the way your bureaucracy is structured, It might be your wire diagram of how you visualize how a task force operates. If it's exactly the same, why would you expect different outcomes? And so, I find that is often like the biggest challenge for militaries, and it relates more often. Org charts are often about culture. So, to use, I'll win fans by referencing, an Army problem rather than a Navy problem. I find it utterly fascinating that the Army is willing to contemplate having robotic tanks, but it could never visualize having a different number of people in a squad. As if, God decided the number of people in a squad. And in the audience, there's some Marines going, okay, I know what he's referencing to, right? But the same thing, you think back to a task force. The big result for the Navy in the fleet problem exercises of the 1920s and 30s was not just things like the aircraft carrier is useful, it was realizing, hold it, because of wind direction, et cetera, the aircraft carrier needs to be in the center of the task force, not the battleship.
Yeah. And
it leads to this whole chain. But of course, whoa, that's a cultural thing relating to the idea of rating. And we could expand this to talk about, creating 10th Fleet, cyber warriors, changes in Nav Air, powerful, important changes. But will Navy culture and how people think about, bluntly, how to succeed in the force change with it? So to make an example from during a previous industrial revolution, from sail to steam, Navy adds engineers. To be an engineer was not a gentlemanly job. It was to the extent that even when engineers were made officers, this is after the Civil War, their wives were not invited to Navy balls because, well, they're not highbrow enough. Someone who works with their hands, gets dirty, just the spouse of them shouldn't be around all the other spouses. That's an example. And then you move forward to today, what is it? The Naval Academy has I think it's 11 different engineering majors.
Right.
But what I'm getting at is to make a successful shift, it's not just about creating a rating that's important, creating roles. It's about how do we deal with larger culture? How do we create a situation that a young officer or a young enlisted says, I want to go into that because that's not just the future, but I'm going to thrive in the Navy in that future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and everything was going through my head about my 40 years in the United States Navy. We are very tribal. We have tribes and we have different boutiques, and sometimes it's really hard to break down the culture and push forward something like a new technology of uncrewed systems. I know you're tracking Replicator, the initiative launched by DepSecDef Cat Hicks last year. We had Doug Beck from Defense Innovation Unit on the dais this morning, and I asked him specifically about Replicator. Could he share some thoughts, insights? Apparently she has down-selected some forms of this hellscape of drones that will be overwhelming for an adversary in the future, but Doug wasn't able to go into details. We're about 7 to 8 months in. I think he's got about $1 billion in the budget, and plans on delivering on time in August 2025. So this is something completely different than what we've done in the past, and I just wonder, what do you think about it?
So the first is, I'm definitely a fan of the vision of Replicator, which I believe is more aligned with both the future of war and the kind of dilemmas that we want to place upon our adversaries than, bluntly, some of the other visions and even programs of record. And this is where people in the audience are like, don't say my program, don't say my program. But if we look at experience in Ukraine, if we look at Gaza, if we look at PLA plans, the demand signal, the lesson is not, wow, I wish we had more 155 millimeter rounds. I mean, it would be great to, but that's not the only lesson. But even if we're looking at unmanned systems or remotely operated drones, however you want to frame it, the demand signal is more, not bigger. And that's true for every single domain, whether we're talking about surface vessels, whether we're talking about aerial, we're talking about UGVs. The demand is more, not bigger. Relating to creating dilemmas for our adversaries. We will gain, there are certain visions where we will gain in number through the use of uncrewed or partnered systems or whatever, and that's great. It gives us greater capability, but does it force the adversary to go back to the drawing board with their plan? So if I am an adversary and they've got 4 crewed fighters, or they've got 4 crewed and 4 uncrewed. That made my life harder. But it didn't mean I have to junk all my plans. It didn't mean my systems are just can't deal with it.
Yeah.
But if I go from 4 to now they're bringing in 100 or 400, now I have to rethink everything. And that's why I think the replicator vision is great. The challenge of it is bluntly the number that you talked about that is still, is it confirmed or not, but is it $1 billion, which, if we're watching an Austin Powers movie, sounds like a huge amount of money, but if we're thinking about moving the dial of the entire defense industry, particularly when it's not going to be winner take all, I don't think it truly moves the dial. It creates some incentives, but it doesn't mean that a responsible company, certainly major companies, go, I got to change, just like that adversary. I got to change what I'm doing because there's so much money on the table. And so I think that's the challenge for the program right now. And again, it's not a critique of it; it's just a reflection of reality.
No, that's absolutely in violent agreement with you there. I think we've got to have that proof of concept first, and then hopefully apply more resources to it so that we can have a change in culture and a change in which in the way that we fight wars. Okay, you've already mentioned it, but I'd like to talk a little bit about Ghost Fleet here because there's so much goodness in this book. I've never come across anybody who doesn't love this book. It's on the Commandant of the Marine Corps' reading list, the Chief of Naval Operations reading list, and it's in many of the U.S. and foreign war college reading lists. And you talked about the impact that you and August Cole had on this. The opening scene is a chiller and a thriller. You got a great imagination too, Peter. I mean, Dr. Chris Farmer, the astronaut's going to do an extravehicular activity on the International Space Station. As he goes out the door, his comrade cosmonaut says, "I'm sorry, Chris," and he's locked out, and that's the start of the war. That was a really scary way to start. Particularly for me, I had 3 classmates at the Naval Academy that were space shuttle pilots, Brent Jett, Wendy Lawrence, and Kay Heyer. Wendy trained with the Russians in spaceport in Kazakhstan. She came to a Christmas party we had here in town last December, and she talked about her experience alongside the Russians, and glass was half full. She said they're just like us, and the one thing that was commonality between them and us was families and love of family, and unfortunately all that has been spoiled today. So I worry about what's going on up there, and I don't know if you have thoughts on this, Peter, but since it was in the book, do you think we're going to be able to sustain the International Space Station and this partnership, rocky as it is with the Russians?
So that scene, why we chose to open with it, but again, there's this idea in each, try and create something that's compelling and people can see it, they can feel it. It's kind of chilling, right?
Yeah.
But it's also that smoothie, that what's my intent, what am I trying to share? And what we were trying to share on the nonfiction side was this idea that our visions of great power conflict, a World War III, it would be different than the way we thought about it during the Cold War and the way that we had experienced it during World War I and World War II, because of, first, new domains that we either could not reach previously. The first, the concept of the artificial satellite doesn't come until after World War II, from Arthur C. Clarke, great science fiction writer, but the real world idea of it. So, but second, domains that didn't even exist, cyberspace. So we wanted to share that. And then another aspect of it was the idea that you could be at war and not even be aware of it. And again, when you think about both counter space, but also cyberspace operations,
Absolutely.
in many ways, the opening battles of World War III have already been fought. We're just not aware of them when we're thinking about, critical infrastructure, vulnerabilities, et cetera. And so that's what we were trying to share. What's interesting is we started that book, again, part of when I start a book, it's like almost like out of a sense of frustration. And back then, this was like 2011-ish maybe. And in the discussions, again, of the future of war, of strategy, most of the focus was on counterinsurgency, counterterrorism. That was both, and if you'd gone down on the floor at Sea Airspace,
Sure.
it all would have all been like, here's
yeah.
how we're supporting the fight in Iraq. And it was in the doctrine, it was in the strategy. Our vision of relationship with China, you'll recall it was things like we could lead them to be, the quote was, a responsible international partner. And we felt, no, great powers tend historically to get into competition and conflict. The only time it's been successfully navigated is the US and Britain, and that was because they were more worried about another great power, Germany. But we felt that the vision was off, and so that's why we started the project. Now, take what was happening then, where we had to kind of make a slight argument of, yes, Iraq and Afghanistan matter, but open up your eyes. We're going to be in competition and conflict with China, and if there was a war, it would play out differently because of things like cyber, because of our adversary is making our microchips for us or making our network. This never happened before. To today, I don't think you, again, like that drone speech, you don't have to make the argument that there's a risk of a conflict with a Russia, with a China, and that it doesn't go away because of whatever plays out in Ukraine or whatever plays out even in Taiwan. There's still that risk because of the larger geopolitical dynamics.
Outstanding. One of the heroes in the book, and a guy that I like, but he was short-lived, is Worm, the Marine aviator. So call sign Worm. He flies the F-35 when the Chinese come ashore in Hawaii. And ultimately, he's up there engaging targets, manned and unmanned, in this fight. And he Winchesters his magazine, military term of art for you shoot everything you got nothing left. No weapons, no missiles, no bullets. So he resigns himself to the fact that if he lands, he's not going to get airborne again, so he's just going to stay out and try to wreak havoc on the Chinese, and probably punch out someplace over the Pacific and hope that he gets ashore. He doesn't get that far. He's detected, and the enemy launches a missile at his F-35, and this is the invincible airframe that's invisible. And due to a corrupted microchip, which causes, instead of causing the aircraft to be invisible, it kind of lights it up to the sensor and the seeker of this missile, and Worm is hit and killed and goes down with that F-35. So Peter, so I read the first passage about space, and I read this, and I go, whoa, could we really have corrupt microchips in that very special, very sensitive program? And maybe your book is the reason why we have the CHIPS Act today. Now, you said a lot of people called you in, there was a lot of hearings. So what was the impact of that particular part of the book?
So first, I want to compliment you on the scenes that you're sharing are from like the first 30 pages of the book. So you're doing a great job of both sharing the book but not ruining the story for everybody. I always hate that where they're like, and in the ending did it. I'm like, come on, we can't expect everybody to read
I'm
the
not
book.
going there.
That scene, is a couple of things that it was about showing off. One, a cool, like what a future of a air-to-air battle might look like, but how it might involve not just sort of kinetic back and forth guns, missiles, but the electronic warfare, but also what we were talking about earlier, the idea that the moments in a aerial battle, it might have been decided months earlier by what happened within your supply chain, right?
Yeah.
And again, now there's been a lot of discourse around this, but we were trying to present it. The other aspect that scene was great for is it shows the value of having a novel with footnotes, because that scene, there was some people, it scared them. I can confirm that there were a 3 and a 4 star, and the reason why the book took off is they were actually in the tank in the Pentagon. This was shared with me, and one of them yawned before meeting, and the other said, why are you yawning up late last night? And it's like, yeah, I was reading this new book, and there was a scene in it. Oh, it was horrible. And he's like, could that really happen? And so they did what you probably did whenever you faced a problem and didn't have an answer to it. They told their aides to go research it and come back and tell us. And it had the footnote to the DARPA report that said, here's the actual facts behind it. And then why that was also valuable is that scene made a certain company really upset. And same thing, this could never happen, or you're making up stuff. And we're like, hey, don't blame us, DARPA. Here's the report. And so that's the role. It's within the fiction, by having the references, by doing your work, it shows this is real, which to me makes it not just, it makes it more interesting, more useful, but it's the same role that, footnotes play in nonfiction. It's for the people that want to know more. Here's where you go. It's a guide to them. How are we doing now on supply chain? We have made vast improvements, especially in the last year or so, related to chips. But there still are larger issues in our supply chain, both for direct military systems, but also the larger civilian economy, that obviously would create massive problems if there was to be a crisis or a conflict, particularly with China. And I think we're all kind of, maybe I won't say that way. I would say people in the know in the national security world are aware of it. I think within the larger economy, there's still a number of companies and leaders that are kind of kidding themselves. Of this, the significance of what the shock to the system would be if there was to be like a crisis in Taiwan.
Thank you. Last question on Ghost Fleet, and I won't spoil the ending for you, but you and August used the Zumwalt class destroyer in the book, and it had a railgun. And I've got a piece of metal in my office that's got a hole in it that was penetrated by a railgun round out at Dahlgren when I went out for a demonstrator when I was a 3-star. And I thought it had tremendous promise. We canceled the program. It was supposed to be the infinite magazine. Zumwalt's got a lot of capacitance, a lot of power to be able to continually launch these things. And I'm not sure that was the right move. I mean, these rounds were supposed to be $100,000 a piece. We're talking about $2 million SM2s against $2,000 drones today. So there's also open press reporting, open source information like Data Miner on, the Chinese are pursuing railgun. So this reminds me of our first attempt at electric drive when I was working for Naval Reactors in 2001. They gave it up because it was $1 billion. Well, now it's going to be on the Columbia. So do you think we ought to go full circle and come back to the railgun?
Yeah, that's it's one of the interesting predictions that came true in the book, in that early in the book, the Zumwalt class has not taken off the way that people said and planned that it would, because of cost overruns, and the Navy has basically decided that it doesn't want them anymore. That's complete fiction. That would never, he's smiling at me for those that are listening. It's what played out. And then secondly, the railgun program has been shelved. And again, in reality, it's been shelved after about a roughly $500 million in spending on it. You can go visit one of the railguns. It's in a warehouse at Naval Postgrad School. It's like the scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where just in this, dust is gathering on this railgun. But the point is, that's what we had in the fiction, and it's played out. And in the narrative, and I still will hold to this in the real world, that technology has value. I think, though, the key value for it is, and it comes to, is not in the role that was originally envisioned, and it's part of why they canceled it, is they didn't think about it in an alternative role, which both China and Japan are thinking about. The railgun program, there was a couple of issues for it. One, they were not able to solve some of the barrel wear issues and some other issues related to that. And then secondly is that it was part of the larger story of the Zumwalt class being more expensive than planned. We didn't have as many of them, and that's both those tie into each other. And but basically the Navy looked at it, and I hope I'm not talking out of school, but essentially said this major ship program for it's not going there. Secondly, the value of the railgun was to be sort of in that space between main gun and long-range missile, but we can handle that with either current programs and or future hypersonics or whatnot. It was that strike role. How the Japanese and how the Chinese are looking at it is actually in an air defense, counter-missile, counter-drone role, where
like a wall of steel.
Exactly, and the cost equation, and it's a problem whether you talked about going Winchester on the F-35. It's the same thing if it's on an Aegis. Even if you get 100% accuracy, which you're never going to get, but even if you get it, there's just only so many missiles that you can carry, and they're incredibly expensive. And the vision is instead, can we use a railgun in that role? Fast shooter, cheap shots, and that's where they're looking at it. And then secondly, because time and technology, between what was happening in, say, 2015 to today, China at least claims in open source settings to have mastered some of the problems that we previously had with targeting and barrel wear and the like through the use of AI. And so I remain hopeful that as what happened in the book will bring back the railgun program, maybe not in the way that was originally envisioned, but I think it could help us with some of the key dilemmas. And I would add, one of the other things is, don't just think about it in a at-sea role. Think about the value of that kind of system in a, for example, defending the Guam or an Okinawa or a Marine base out on an atoll. The configurations basically are the size of like a Patriot missile battery.
Yeah.
It's not super easy to move, but somewhat mobile. And that, again, that would provide a kind of defense to them that it would, complicate the adversary's life rather than just going, oh, they can shoot down 40 missiles. Well, I'll fire 41. And so can we kind of change that cost and position idea?
Yeah, and here at Sea Airspace, we've heard a lot of discussion and dialogue on not just railgun, but probably more importantly, directed energy. We've got to get after that. And high power microwave is getting to the left of the kill chain. And
Yeah, all those together, each offer that kind of potential rewriting of the story. I think one of the others is most likely it's going to be in combination, right? It's going to be there's certain settings that the high power, whether it's directed energy, microwave, classic kinetic kill, missile, each one does well in different types of settings. It's going to be a layered approach is the most likely. But what I think about a lot of these programs is, how to put this, there are the favored children of military programs, and then there's the unwanted stepchildren. And there's these programs that have value, but for whatever reason, it's often because they are the responsibility of a certain part of the organization that doesn't want them or isn't as interested in them or doesn't have the juice behind them. So it's the idea of, railgun, but in a air defense role, or naval sea mines, incredible capability.
Oh, yeah.
Have, let's be mean, have sunk more warships, including ours. And yet, not a major program. And then we were looking also about how do you deploy them? One of the most effective means of deploying them that we used to be really good at was using Air Force bombers. Guess what? Air Force bomber pilots and the Air Force bomber that's not what they want to do, even though that may be the biggest complication for if I'm a Chinese defense planner, if you can create a massive network of smart mines in off Taiwan, wow, you made my life a heck of a lot harder than if you had been able to introduce one more frigate or one more F-35. We could kind of go through these sort of unwanted stepchildren and go, we would get a lot out of them, but how can they get the support that they need, particularly if they're housed within a certain organization that either doesn't have the juice or is that's really not what I want to do.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. I understand exactly what you're saying. Okay. Let's shift gears to the next book, Like War. This got Data Miner very excited because it's about social media. It's about open source information. I love the book. And in the book, you highlight Russia as a net exporter of sponsored trolls, these entities that seed lies all over the world. And you describe Russian disinformation at its finest and identify 4 principles that the Russians use in their disinformation campaign: dismiss the critic, distort the facts, distract from the main issue, and dismay the audience. And to these 4 Ds, you added a 5th, and that is divide the target population. And if you look at what's going on real world today in this country, in the midst of this very contested electoral process as we move towards presidential election, I think you're absolutely spot on. Shifting gears to your chapter entitled "The Truth is Out There, Social Media and the End of Secrets." And you quote a CIA agent as telling you that secrets now come with a half-life. I read that and I was like, that is so true. Everyone has access to information nowadays. And frankly, I've heard from people senior to me, and I've even said it myself sometimes, sitting in active duty overseas and reading reports, intel reports. Sometimes I got as much or more out of The Economist as I did out of these reports. Not even repressive regimes like Myanmar, and we had somebody from Myanmar at our STEM day on Sunday, or the Russian Federation can just stamp it out completely. And there's a very compelling story in your book, and it's really ironic, and I'll explain to you why. A Pakistani guy named Sohaib Attar, who's a coffee shop owner and kind of a techie, a geek that you write about. He was an aspiring journalist and a blogger, and he lived in Abbottabad. Remember where bin Laden was holed up, where bin Laden was killed during Operation Neptune Spear, the SEAL team operation that brought to justice this terrorist. Attar reported helicopters overhead at 1 a.m. And by morning, it was all over, and it hit international news that the Americans had killed Osama bin Laden. Attar, you said, became a celebrity and a pariah overnight. His Twitter account exploded, and some accused him of being an American spy. Imagine his life was in danger. Ironically, in that very seat last year, CBS journalist and 60 Minutes broadcaster David Martin opined to the CEO of our sponsor, Data Miner, that he heard these initial reports coming out of Pakistan, reported through First Alert, which is their network that reports these kinds of things. Something was going on in Abbottabad. And David Martin is sitting there on Saturday night or Sunday night, and he just dismissed the report as noise on the net and hit delete. And he shared with us how much he regretted that decision, because he could have been the first guy out there that broke that story. So I would agree with you that social media has, in effect, made it harder to keep secrets. Now, in the realm of what nations do and how nations maintain their national security, I want to ask you, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Wow, you touched on so much. You're definitely right, very much agreement with the challenge of these kinds of threats, the challenge of the weaponization of social media, is that it's certainly been used to target us and our democracy. With that, whether it's spreading disinformation, it's trying to divide. It famously, was part of the story of the 2016 election. It is already part of the story of this year's election. As you and I are speaking, there was a recent trove of files from a Russian troll farm that was released, and basically, laid out their strategy of, both. It was both about how to target our election, instructions to their personnel, and it was also about trying to undermine support for Ukraine. And the unfortunate fact of the mistruths is they're working. And it's been part of the change of the narrative of support for Ukraine. We have seen Russian disinformation literally repeated on the floor of the House of Representatives, let alone in your own personal accounts. But the second part of it is it'd be great to point our finger at adversaries and say, you're the cause of the problem. We're our own worst enemies. Yeah. And when it comes to these issues, as you lay out the Russian tactics, dismay, dismiss the critic, distract, divide. Everyone in here is like, well, yeah, that describes, a successful, political campaigning right now. So we kind of, we don't need the foreign adversary. We're good enough at our own conspiracy theories and division. So I'm deeply, deeply worried about it. I'm deeply worried about, bluntly, some of the progress that we made in battling mis and disinformation over the past years has been rolled back in the last year or two. And a third thing to talk about is, what does this not just mean for our politics, but how is it being used to target our military? Both now to draw our military into the culture wars, we've seen a sea change in how the military is talked about in different partisan realms. A lot of that, with falsehood behind it. But then we have, what would happen in a conflict,
Right.
and how would it be used not just on scale, but for example, to target individual members of the military and or their families. It's chilling, but we should expect it. And that again leads to, we need to think about changes in everything from laws and regulation to better equipping members of the services to deal with information threats targeting them. Everybody gets their training, cyber training when they change post.
Right.
We're not actually getting the training for the information warfare side of things, which is arguably could be even more effective. So I think, those are some of the things going on in the information warfare space. It's a tough, bluntly for me, a very depressing topic, because we're not doing well at it. I'll end on a hopeful note. We can do well because there are models of other democracies that are much better at creating resilience in their democracy, in their military from these kind of information threats. It's in the cyber world. So there's the saying in Christianity, WWJD, what would Jesus do? In the cyber world, it should be WWED, what would Estonia do? Because the Estonians are just so good at so many realms of cyber and dealing with information threats. So if you're at a loss on what to do in this space, basically ask yourself, what did the Estonians do, and copy them. And so, it's a point of what a democracy that's preserved freedom of speech, that has a very vibrant economy, you can do it. We can do it. We just have to actually learn from others.
Absolutely. They sure took a hit when the Russians took their networks down.
And that was they went through they had this experience in, what was it, 2007, and they said, we're gonna learn from it. The other thing that's very powerful for them is that, like, if anyone knows the threat of Russian tanks rolling over you, it's the Baltics.
Yeah.
And yet they said, you know what? We're still going to invest and get good at the cyber and the info ops side of things, at the digital resilience, because that is as much or more of a threat to us as the conventional side.
Outstanding. Last book, last question, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. This is Burn In, and I finished it a couple of weeks ago. It just really cool book. I liked it. Burn In, kind of the plot, is the story of an FBI agent and her new partner, TAMS, T-A-M-S, which is Tactical Autonomous Mobility System. So we're back to talking about robots. The book takes place 20 years in the future. You and your co-author would deem this book useful fiction. Again, August Cole. The reason being is we can learn something from the scenario you set up. The world's going through kind of a revolutionary phase whereby artificial intelligence, algorithms, and machines have put the human workforce out of the workspace. So it's almost like labor relations, AFL-CIO. People are upset, they're out of a job. It's tough to compete with the robots. So folks put on their virtual reality glasses and kind of leave the space of reality and go off into a different zone. And some of these individuals become radicalized. So FBI agent Laura Keegan and her robot TAMS are looking for these nefarious elements that are undermining our national security. They drive around Washington, D.C. in a self-driving car. And you've obviously grown up here like I did, because all the little landmarks and things, it was kind of a treat for me to go, I know where that is. I know where Farragut Square is, as I'm going through the book. I won't spoil the outcome of the book for you, but this was an incredible yarn, and it really kept my attention. I didn't want to put it down, and I read it all in a weekend. Several lessons learned in the book about the human-machine interface, the future of technology. Stavridis writes in his 2054 that there will be this coming together of AI, quantum, and genomics, a la Ray Kurzweil of singularity, and we'll get to a singularity. Similarly, in your book, that man-machine interface is there. So, last question, why'd you write it, and do you really believe we'll be there in 20 years?
So, Burn-In is, in many ways, it's a quiet sequel to Ghost Fleet.
Yeah.
So it takes place in the same world, but you don't have to have read Ghost Fleet to understand it. But what we wanted to do was two things. First, the nonfiction side, the nonfiction version of it, it was for a project called AI Visualized. And it was basically, what are the key issues? Roughly, what are the 100 things that people need to know about AI? Everything from kind of the basics of how it works to how are everyone from Amazon to Starbucks to the police going to be using it? What are some of the dilemmas? And then we built the scenes around those need to knows. And then the other is we wanted to have a story that was, it's kind of a classic, like, we call it a two-hander. There's the good guys, or gal in this case, and it's almost like, it's a buddy cop. They're working together. Just in this case, the buddy is this machine, and the second hander is the bad guy. We won't reveal who it is, but we follow the two of them, the two groups, but as they go, they're traveling through DC, and so you're using, when she takes her kid to Starbucks, you get to see like how Starbucks is going to change, or when they're trying to find a terrorist in a crowd at Union Station, we get to see not only like what a big kind of transportation hub is going to look like, but we also get this sort of what is it like to try and find a bad guy in a crowd, but you're using AI and face recognition, but is it steering you towards the right person? And so that's kind of what we were after with it. But then the larger lesson was the narratives around robots and AI almost always get to some kind of, you referenced it, it's either a singularity or it's a robot revolt. It's this, bluntly, it's a sci-fi narrative.
Yeah, sure.
Instead, the data shows, the challenge, at least for your and my lifetime, is we're going through an industrial revolution, and that's a huge deal. Like, well, it's not robots going to kill us all, so it must not. No, going through an industrial revolution is a really, really big deal, and there are winners and losers from that, just like back with mechanization. In particular, the transition of the winners and losers, whether it's in our politics, in business, to individual jobs. Some jobs are going to be created, some jobs are going to go out of date, maybe disappear. And so what is it like to be in that world? And so that's what we were after. Bluntly, the timeline you asked, like, I kind of described, a lot of that's happening right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're thinking about everything from the feel that the world's changing around us faster than we can handle, our laws or our policies aren't keeping up with it, to people finding that they're not either valued at work or they're not drawing their value from work, and it leaves them feeling lost. How this all links to, populism in our politics, sometimes extremism, to just, out in the hallway, one of the robot systems that we had in the book is walking down the hallway. So we could say, oh, it's not real. Well, there it is. And that's, again, only the start of this. So that's what we were after with the book. It's this combination of wanting to teach people, but also you were very kind, just tell a cool, fun story. And in particular, have characters, I don't know how to put it, like, I love our hero or heroine. She's just she's
Laura.
So Laura Keegan, it's an FBI, but it's not the cliche one. She's dealing with all this, not just work, but like what it's like to be a parent. And sometimes in that feel that you're always failing, which is like every parent sort of vibes with that. Yeah. To our bad guy, the best villains to me are the one, they don't pull at their mustache. They're villains that like have a point. They may be going about it the wrong way, but when they talk, their reasons, you're kind of like, oh, that's somewhat maybe right, or at least the different way of putting it, every good villain thinks they're the hero of the story. And that's the same with our bad guy. So it's, both like falling in love with the characters, but also, again, trying to share these scenes and lessons learned, which again, I think apply both for understanding the economy, but there's military lessons from them as well, and understanding, we've got a scene of like what a tactical unit looks like. To bluntly, every leader in the military or in corporate world right now needs to know the basics of AI, but they're probably not going to go read a 250-page book on the basics of AI. So let's give them that smoothie.
Yeah, because they'll be compelled to get through it.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Brilliant discussion. I'd like to open it up to the floor for a couple questions before we adjourn here. Please step up to the mic, sir. Tell us who you are and what's your question.
Wade McConvey from KBR. great, thoughtful discussion today at what I consider a very refreshing pace, considering all the panels I've been at. And it struck me as I sat here today, a lot of discussion about data. We have too much of it, can't organize it, can't analyze it quick enough to then distill information and then knowledge. And I think of my 3 children who are in their 20s who have grown up with smartphones and this inundation of cotton candy information all the time. And so I think they're wired a little differently than my generation. And so have you given some thought to how that is going to affect us in the future for developing strategy, developing new systems, just dealing with the human nature of it? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think there's a couple of things packed in there, what you laid out. One is it's definitely verifiable that our attention spans have changed, largely driven by the technologies that we have at our fingertips and or what we or your kids grew up with. Famously now we get it's to goldfish level. I mean, I'm not making, it's literally the amount of time that a goldfish gets bored. Now someone in their 20s gets bored and wants to click on. But I find the same thing, myself, even though I didn't, kind of grew up with smartphones and I still find myself there's movies and TV shows that I watch right now that feel too slow. And I'll click and fast forward. I'll jump 20, 30 seconds. Or podcasters. There is some percentage of the people listening to this that will be listening at it at 1.25 or 1.4. They'll speed it up, right? So there's that speed. I think, let's pull back and think about what does that mean for decision-making in conflict, developing strategy, all the, there's a big effect from it. The second that you lay out is that problem of the sheer mass amount of data that's now able to be collected and distilled and shared with us. It leads to issues, and we one of the scenes in Burnin is about this. It can be overwhelming, and both cognitively, but also kind of in decision-making terms, emotionally. But then there's the second part of it, which again, and it's whether your friends at Dataminer to the people working at whether Navair, your company, it's the difference. There's data, and then there's how do I turn that into useful information that's deployable, and the signal from the noise or whatever, and that's a major issue that everyone's wrestling with. And then there's a final part of it is, again, we can see this, for example, controversies you and I are speaking related to AI and data is the Israeli deployment of AI decision aids for targeting in Gaza right now. And incredibly controversial for a lot of different reasons, but one of which is their tolerance of different levels of error rate and civilian casualties. Reportedly, they have accepted a 10% error rate in terms of determining who should be killed or not. This is from a system called Lavender. But then you have another, which is, it's the whole, bad data in, bad outcome. And so among the things that the Israeli system was being trained on was if someone was, for example, using a cell phone near past areas of explosions and terrorist attacks, the mining of the data says, well, that's, it scores them on 0 to 100. It gives them a greater likelihood of saying this person's more likely to be a Hamas member. Makes perfect sense. You can see why the data would yield you that way, except someone who's using a cell phone frequently near an incident, a bombing, could also describe a firefighter, could describe a journalist, right? So the data, bad input can lead to bad outcome.
Thank you. Sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Fascinating discussion here. While you were talking there, I was thinking as we look ahead here 25, 30 years from now, is the concept of strategic surprise even a a possibility anymore. And if you want to pull the string even further, is operational or tactical surprise even something that we should even look at as military people? Because it seems like you're going to have this massive amount of data, massive amount of information. You should never get surprised. And if you do, it's because you wanted to be, or you just, I don't understand how surprise can still be a concept anymore.
Yeah, it's a really great question you ask. I mean, there's also the question of, is there such a thing actually of strategic surprise, or is it an excuse that we make afterwards? So if you think about the major failures, on like strategic intelligence failures, whether it was a Pearl Harbor, a 9/11, the Israelis on October 7th, it's almost never a black swan. We couldn't imagine it. No one told us about it to be ready for it. Again, go through those, whether it's the type of operation already happened, so Pearl Harbor, Toronto, like it had been already shown off. You could do really bad things with torpedo bombers against battle fleets at sea, to, literally the warnings to, we're going to get controversial in it, the warnings to Kimmel and Stark beforehand, to literally the last hour beforehand, where it's the flight coming in and they go, oh yeah, but that's B-17s, right? Same discourse related to 9/11, to the Israelis on October 7th. Multiple warnings that were unfortunately not listened to. Even tragically, one of the female officers was, told that she's basically just being too imaginary. And she was tragically one of the people that was killed on October 7th. So first is, do we actually have strategic surprises, or is it we just didn't listen? We made bad decisions, and so then we framed it as a surprise. But the second, which you raise, is this issue of, as we move forward, or even today, is there so much sensor data, so much observation, whether it's satellites, drones, digital, open source intelligence, you name it, that we're entering a world of, no more secrets, of transparency. If you can mine the data, you can find it. So the outcome of that is, if you can't hide, you have to deceive. But deception, whether it's at a tactical level or a strategic level, is something that we have a hard time talking about. It's also not, go read the doctrine, not just our doctrine, but French military doctrine. There's not a lot in it about deception, tactical level, strategic, despite the fact that we used to be the masters of it. I mean, the story of the Ghost Army before the Normandy invasion. Think about the deceptions related to Battle of Midway. We used to be great at deception at a tactical and strategic level. So it's, what I'm getting at is, you can be a democracy, a professional military, and be actually good at tactical or strategic deception. And it may be one of the things that we're going to have to put a lot more effort into, given this world of transparency that we're going at. And again, notice I didn't say us violate the laws of war or us lie at inappropriate moments, but there's, deception is something that we're going to have to become a lot better at detecting, and a lot better maybe also at implementing.
Peter, thank you very much. And folks, that's a wrap. I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you have not heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. Episodes and all content described here today can be found on our new website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org, all lowercase. Thank you, Data Miner, for the sponsorship, and thank you, Dr. Peter Singer, for a spectacular discussion here today. Stay tuned for the next rendition of Maritime Nation. Thank you, sir.